Hey guys, welcome back to my channel for an all new episode recap of today's Days of Our Lives, June 16, 2025. So, a belated happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. Keep doing what you're doing. I hope you had an amazing day yesterday. So, we're heading into this episode. It is Jack's birthday, and it's also something more important, which is Steve Johnson's 40th anniversary on the show, which is definitely a big milestone to celebrate. So we start off with Jack, and Jack is not in the mood to celebrate his birthday because, again, it's tied into Abigail's death anniversary, and it's just obviously not a great time to celebrate. He has not been in the mood for years because of it. So Jennifer says, "Look, Abigail always would put a lot of emphasis on celebrating his birthday, making a big deal out of it. So she would want him to go on, move forward and to still celebrate that, right? And she wants it as well. So Jack, eventually, he agrees to celebrate it and he makes a wish. He didn't tell Jennifer at first, but later on in the episode, he tells Jennifer that, I wish for us to come visit Salem a lot more. So she agrees to it that, definitely we'll do that. It wasn't much to the scene with Alex and Stephanie more than they're just getting ready for Steve's retirement party. And Alex is kind of nervous because, he wants to make the right impression with Stephanie's parents. They have met before, but, they're back together and, he wants it to go really well. And Stephanie is saying, don't be paranoid. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine. You know, he asks about how they really feel about him, and she tells him that her mom is happy that they're back together. Her dad is happy for her, but there is some reservations given Alex's past, and used to be a playboy, so he's worried that he might hurt her again. So he assures her that that's not gonna happen, and he talks about his childhood, how Angelica wasn't really the motherly figure. If it wasn't for Adrian and Bonnie, like, he wouldn't be the man that he is today. And Stephanie says that she would have been proud of you, of who you're becoming, right? So Kayla and Sarah are talking, and Kayla is sharing with Sarah how she was going over EJ's proposal for the hospital, and she wasn't really feeling it. She was, saying that EJ really don't have a clue to run the hospital. But I'm just saying, put your money where your mouth is. It is what it is. Like, the better man won, and it is what it is. He has a right to make any change that he wish. He's the one putting in money into it. So, anyways, they talk about Sarah and Xander, because Sarah said that she's willing to do more overnight shifts because her daughter goes down at an earlier time, and she doesn't really have a husband to go home to anymore. I mean, whose fault is that? But anyways, she said that she can take on more shifts, and Kayla said that she ran into Xander earlier and she gave him an earful of how she feels about what he did and all that. So she's sorry for overstepping. So Sarah said it's no big deal. I had an argument with him myself. So Kayla said, "You want to talk about it?" So she said, "No, I want to talk about something else. Like, what are you up to?" So she said that she's heading out to Steve's retirement party from Black Patch. So she said, enjoy, and please tell him congratulations on my behalf. And that was really that. Steve was at home and he had an unusual dream. It was an appearance from his late sister Adrian. So she was there to really tell him that, look, John is all right. John is with us now and he's watching over you. He'll always be with you. And don't worry about him, right? So Steve felt, a sigh of relief for that. He definitely will miss his friend, but he is comforted by that, right? At first he thought it was Bonnie, because again, their resemblance is uncanny. It's the same actress that plays both of them. So he was wondering why Bonnie would just come into his house like that. And then, Adrian had to remind him that, look, we have a real major difference. Like, I dress really classy. Bonnie dressed, and he had to finish it and said that she dresses really what did he say, tacky. So she said, yeah, you said it, thank you for saying it, and saving me from saying that, right? So he also mentioned that you guys have a very big difference other than that, and that's she had to finish it for him, and she said that I'm dead, she's alive. So he said, like, thank you for saying that instead of me. So He didn't want her to go at first, but she had to go. And, it was a short dream. He realized that he was dreaming. He had a little bit too much to drink at John's repast. So that was really it. Kate runs into Sarah, and Kate is asking for help to retrieve, something from the lost and found. So, she asked her if she had seen something. So she said no, but she can help to look for it. But before they could be able to do that, Kate sees the security the police officer that's supposed to be standing guard in Philip's room. So she asked him, like, what are you doing out here? So he said that, I had an upset stomach, something I drink. So she's like, this is just crazy. Like, you're supposed to be there guarding the room. So you mean Philip is unguarded? So they run off, and they notice that Philip is alive, not alive, but conscious, right? So earlier we remember that Xander was there with the pillow, and he was trying to smother his brother, but I don't know what happened between them, because he did see Philip awake, and they came in and they saw him, and they're wondering, like, what is he doing in the room? So he said, I just came here to check in my brother, da 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 da. We know that's not it. But anyways, they're just wondering, like, what could have happened. And Xander's there saying, I'm glad he's up and about. So they both want him to leave at this point. So it's like, gladly, I hope you feel better. So anyways, Philip is still kind of out of it. He just kept asking, Mom, are you okay? You seem angry. So she said, no, I'm just happy that you're up and about. So anyways, Sarah said that she was going to run some tests on him to see if he's all good. So Kate is outside talking to the police officer, like, you're very incompetent, and I'm going to make sure Jada knows about this. So I said, like, I didn't know what come over me. Like, I drank some coffee and I just felt sick after that. So Kate thinks that Xander was up to this and probably drug him, and that's how he went into the room without the police officer stopping him, right? So, anyway, Sarah comes out and said that she has to run some more blood work on him. And, hopefully they'll find some answers, or, they can be able to find out what happened on that day. So Kate said, are you really sure you want to know? Because, for your relationship with Xander. So she's like, yeah, I definitely want to know what happened, right? So anyways, she goes to run the test, and Kate was on the phone talking to Roman as well, that, Philip woke up and that she will come home later, right? Steve is out of his dream, and Kayla comes home, and she's just asking what's been going on. So he tells her about the weird dream he had of his sister visiting him, and yeah, telling him about John. And she also asked him if he's up to go to the surprise retirement party. So he said that he's really not into it because of everything that's been going on lately and with John. So she says she understands, but she's saying, maybe we can put the grief aside. And Stephanie's probably there, so it's like, I don't really want to stand her up. So she said, no, it's not even that, just let's try to have a good night tonight, right? So he definitely, was hesitant at first, but he said, okay, let's go. So Jada runs into Xander in the square, and he's like, what can I do for you now? So she said that I just was on the phone with Kate, and she told me about an officer that was at guard in Philip's room. He was, feeling under the weather. We're thinking that probably he was drugged. Do you have anything to do with it? So it's like, I don't know what you're talking about. So she said, what were you really doing in your brother's room? So it's like, was just checking on him, seeing how he's doing, and I see that he was awake. So she said, you know what? When Philip comes to it, I have a feeling that I'll be coming to talk to you sooner than later. So my advice to you is just to stay in town and don't leave. So it's like, duly noted. So Kate comes back into the room to check in on Philip and see how he's doing. And, Jada and Sarah also come in to, just ask questions if he's up to it. So he said, okay, fine, go ahead. So Jada asks him if he remembers the day of the assault, and he said yes, he remembers that he was assaulted. So they asked him if they know who is his attacker, who was his attacker. So Kate asked him if it was Xander, so he said no, Xander didn't do it. So they're all surprised, like what? Because they have like a surveillance footage of him coming out the room at the time he was assaulted. So what does he mean? So I don't know what could have happened in that time that Xander was in the room. Maybe Xander blackmailed him, because again, Philip also could go to jail for, forging the letter and all of that. So maybe Xander used that to help him get out of jail card, like a get out of jail card too. So I don't know. Maybe they spoke before Sarah and Kate came in, or maybe Philip just wants to protect his brother and to try to get back on his good side, like an eye for an eye. Because again, he did kind of blow up Xander's life by doing all of that. So I think he really owes him, right? So the main part of the episode was really, them having a retirement party for Steve from Black Patch. Steve is pleasantly surprised, and he thanks Stephanie for throwing this for him. It definitely, made him feel better, considering everything that's going on, right? So Jack and Jennifer are also there to support him. And, Alex is trying to, make a good impression. And he's like, welcome, sir. And, Steve said, oh, just to make me feel old. I already retired. That, way to make me feel older. So he's just, being his jovial self. And Alex is like, sorry. He's pretty nervous, right? Because again, that is the his girlfriend's father and everything. He's pretty intimidating guy at times. So anyways, they sit down and they talk about Steve's legacy, him being there in Salem for 40 years, and they remember how he came into Salem 40 years ago. And Steve mentioned to Alex that he was working for his uncle Victor at the time. He was on the other side, the bad side, and how he was enemies with Bo. And Alex was surprised to hear that, because they are as thick as thieves now. He said it didn't always start that way. So they showed some great flashbacks of him back in the day. They also showed some flashbacks of how the family, like him, Steve, and Adrian, how they were connected. I really have to do some more research into this, because I know that they're related as siblings, but they do have different last names. Jack has Devereaux. I'm wondering how him and Angelica were connected, because she does have the same last name, where they married or whatever. So I'm gonna research that back, because my mind is foggy on that. And they talked about how Adrian was the glue of the family, how she got everybody together. And Jack also was saying how he was the rock of the family, and how he donated his kidney. I guess it was his kidney to him when he was ailing. So they showed a throwback of him and Jack as well, and him and Adrian, and how how intense that scene was, because it seems as if they gave away Jack and Steve, and they were living in orphanages, and then they had Adrian, and she was left behind and all that. So I'm definitely going to read up back on that, because it's definitely interesting to know. Jada did come by, because she said that she was going to support Steve, and remember that her father and Steve are very good friends. They also showed a little throwback of him and Dr. Marcus Hunter, and how they would get into adventures together. She was not aware of that one where he was dressing up as Santa, but Steve talks about how, just like Adrian, Marcus will be definitely missed. And I know the person that played Marcus, he died from an illness. So I don't know how his character got you know killed off. I don't know how it went, but I'm definitely gonna read up back on it. So if you guys know in the comments, let me know below. Um they did leave. Jack and Jennifer did leave, and but before that, they also asked Steve, I know it's a retirement party, but I also want to ask if you could help us find grandma's necklace. It would help the family. So Steve thinks about it, and then he said, Bo was trying to get me back into the game, him and Hope, to join with the firm. So he called Bo and said, look, I'm all in for it. So it seems as if it's an unretirement party now. He's back on the case. He's gonna do it. Kayla has his support and everything. So yeah, he thanks everybody for the party, and all of that. So that was it, really, guys. Happy 40 years, Steve Nichols. You're definitely one of the best characters on the show. And yeah, That was it. Comment below your thoughts on today's episodes. Let me know. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to my channel. I will see you guys tomorrow.